There's a habit most thoughtful people carry without recognizing it as a habit. They call it honesty, or transparency, or just respect for the people around them. When they make a choice that affects someone, they explain the reasoning. When they hold a position that might raise concern, they lay out the basis. When they do something that runs against what someone expected, they walk it back carefully, accounting for the concern, making sure no one is left without the why. It looks like consideration, often it is, but there's a version of it, and I think if you sit with this for a moment, you'll recognize it. That doesn't have much to do with consideration. It's something quieter, a need to be understood, to be approved of, to make sure that whatever you chose, no one could fairly hold it against you. Jung had something specific and a little uncomfortable to say about that need. In Volume 7 of the collected works, he describes the persona, the social face, the constructed version of yourself that operates in relation to others. Everyone builds one. Its job is legibility, the smooth management of how you come across. This isn't pathological. Most of the time, it's just functional. But something shifts when the persona becomes the instrument through which you authorize your own choices. When the explanation, the careful laying out of your reasoning, the preemptive accounting for objections, stops being communication and becomes something else entirely. A request. Tell me this was okay. Tell me I was right to do this. Tell me I'm not who I'm afraid you think I am. Jung wrote that to identify completely with the persona is to confuse what you appear to be with what you are, and the person who defaults to constant explanation, not occasionally, not when it's genuinely needed, but as the texture of how they move through the world, has usually made a specific unconscious calculation. My own perception of my choices isn't yet enough authority. I need the world to confirm it. That calculation runs quietly. It's learned early, usually before you have language for it, and it feels too much like a virtue to call it what it is. And here is what it actually costs: attention directed outward, toward managing how you're received, anticipating objection, translating your interior process into something reviewable, is attention not available for something else. Jung's model of psychic energy was precise about this. What he called libido, not in the narrow Freudian sense, but psychic energy in its general form, moves in the direction the psyche consistently sends it. Spend years directing that energy toward how other people receive your choices, and something specific weakens. The internal signal. The pre-verbal, knowing that a thing is right before the mind has constructed a case for it. That signal doesn't translate well into explanation. It arrives too quickly, from somewhere too deep, and it resists verbal packaging. When everything must be explained, made available for comment and revision, the things that resist explanation start to feel untrustworthy. You begin editing your own experience before you've finished having it. You run the justification even when no one is there to receive it. The private authority erodes, not suddenly, in small installments, over many years. I want to tell you about a patient I worked with during my last year in hospice care. 67 years old, esophageal cancer, late stage. His family was large and close and in significant disagreement about a decision he'd made. He declined a feeding tube when swallowing became too difficult. His physicians had presented it as an option. He'd thought it over for 2 days, alone, and said no. His family wanted to understand. What that meant, in practice, was that they wanted reasons they could argue with. His oldest son, especially, kept returning to it, asking questions that were really something else. Variations of, if you could just explain your thinking more fully, maybe we could find another way to see this together. For the first couple of weeks he tried. He mapped his reasoning for each of them, individually and as a group. When the framing didn't land, he tried a different one. He revised the explanation each time he saw it wasn't reaching, and then around the third week, he stopped. Not coldly. He was, if anything, more present with his family after. He listened more carefully. He asked questions he'd apparently been holding back for years. Not about the medical decision, but about his actual life. Things that had been cued behind the explaining. I asked him, near the end, what had changed. He said, "I realized I was spending the time I have left trying to get them to say, it's okay. And I decided they don't have to." It wasn't resignation. It was something closer to the opposite. The room around him changed in those last weeks. His family didn't stop grieving. They grieved more, actually, and more honestly. But there was a quality of contact that hadn't been there before. Something that could only happen once he'd stopped managing what they thought of his choice. Jung kept the Red Book private for almost his entire life. He began it in 1913, a large illuminated manuscript, hand-lettered and elaborately painted. A direct record of what emerged when he systematically withdrew the editorial function of the conscious mind and allowed the unconscious to present what it had. He showed it to almost no one. When he died in 1961, he left no instructions about its publication. The manuscript went into a bank vault in Zurich for more than 70 years. It wasn't published until 2009, 96 years after he began it. The scholar Sonu Shamdasani, who finally published it, described Jung's relationship to the manuscript as protective rather than secretive. The silence around it was doing something. What it was doing was preserving the integrity of material that had never had to earn its legitimacy through external reception. The images, the figures, the unresolved tensions in those pages had never been submitted for comment and revision. They had been allowed to be exactly what they were: contradictory, incomplete, privately true, without the editing that happens to things when you invite the world to weigh in on them. The entire structure of analytical psychology grew from that protected material. The theory of individuation, the transcendent function, the compensatory unconscious, the archetypes. All of it developed from content that had never been explained into smaller, more portable form. The hidden power the title points to isn't a technique. It won't arrive on a specific day. It won't announce itself with any clarity. But there is a threshold, located somewhere in the specific habit of explaining, on the other side of which something has stopped needing management. Not because you've become indifferent to how you're received, because something has come back that was there before the explaining started. A self that had opinions about its own choices before the persona needed to ratify them. A knowing that doesn't require consensus before it feels real. Jung observed that the person who has developed a genuine center, one that exists independently of whether the world has approved it, doesn't become harder to reach. They become more present. Less of their attention is running the background program. There's a quality of ground that wasn't there before. What was going into the explaining comes back, and you find out, slowly, what it was actually for.